Good morning, everyone. I'm Bruce Gordon with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety. We thank you for being here today. We're going to announce an enhanced enforcement campaign targeting impaired drivers from now through Labor Day. You'll hear from a number of speakers about not only that effort, but the effects of impaired driving on the citizens of Minnesota. And you'll hear from people that have directly been impacted by that behavior. Our first speaker will be Donna Berger. She is the Director of the Office of Traffic Safety at the Department of Public Safety. Barb Degnan, who is instrumental in the development of the Broken Heart license plate. You'll hear from Earl Connelly, who lost his son, Austin, in 2012. Gina Calistro, who lost her father, Michael, in 2009. And then Lieutenant Eric Roski of the Minnesota State Patrol. Donna?
Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. You know, every day at work, I receive an email, and the subject line says, fatal count. And attached to that email is a spreadsheet that tracks the year-to-date traffic fatalities on our Minnesota roads. I usually hesitate before I open it, and I hope the numbers didn't change. I hope they didn't change. But far too often, they do change. We post those numbers on our website, and as sad as it is, it's absolutely necessary to see these figures because it reminds us every day why we're here. We want to save lives and spare loved ones from tremendous heartache that comes from a death or a serious injury caused by a preventable traffic crash. 1 in 3 traffic fatalities are alcohol-related. And last year in Minnesota, 81 people lost their lives due to a drunk driving crash. The number of alcohol-related fatalities has dropped over the years, but we must continue to do the DWI enforcement and education campaigns because one death is too many. From August 16th to September 1st, law enforcement agencies across the state will be stepping up enforcement to take drunk drivers off the road. And while offenders are getting extra attention, we must never forget the victims, the senselessness of their deaths or injuries, and we have to remember their loved ones. To kick off this month's campaign, Governor Mark Dayton is declaring today, August 14th, Impaired Driving Victims Day. The proclamation highlights a very special way that Minnesota motorists can honor those impacted by impaired driving. It's a license plate with an image of a broken heart and the phrase, remembering victims of impaired drivers. More than 1,000 vehicles in Minnesota currently display this license plate. But today I'd like to recognize the woman who made this plate possible, Barb Degnan. Motivated by her own painful loss of her son, she helped design the plate and worked diligently to make it available to Minnesota drivers. I'd like to invite Barb to the podium to say a few words.
Thank you and good morning. My 20-year-old son, Dan, was killed in a crash on Christmas Eve, 1992. Dan was the joy of my life. He was killed by an impaired driver. I worked with the Minnesota legislature and the Department of Public Safety for a number of years, developing a license plate that is intended to remember those who have been killed or injured by an impaired driver. Additionally, the symbol of a broken heart will be a reminder of the lifelong heartache caused by an impaired driver's decision to drive. My hope is that the number of these plates will increase, and by having those plates out there, that'll help decrease the senseless death caused by these crashes. I'd also like to thank several people for helping me as I worked on this. I didn't do this alone. There are many people that really were so gracious in helping me get this passed by the legislature. First would be Colonel Matt Langer from the Minnesota State Troopers. Colonel Langer, together with his fellow troopers and all law enforcement who keep our highways safe, I want to say thank you. Sharon Gearman Driscoll, Director of Minnesota for Safe Driving. Sharon is an advocate and a friend, and without her, my darkest days may have overtaken me. Pat McCormick, Director of Public Safety. Pat and her staff worked with me from the very beginning to get this plate a reality, and I thank them. Jody Oscarson, Director Impaired Driving. Jody spent hours with me preparing for today. Today, with her expertise and her compassion, without that, we would not have today. So I thank her. Finally, my husband, John, whose endless support of me continues every day. Thank you.
I'd now like to ask Earl Connelly to come up and say a few words regarding his son, Austin.
Thank you guys for having me out today. In October of 2012, my son, Austin, was killed by a drunk driver in downtown Minneapolis. He was crossing the street, car blew through the intersection, hit him so hard he was propelled into the air forward, and the car actually hit him again. He suffered a lot of internal injuries, and he died about 9 o'clock that night. I was unfortunately out of town at the time, and I made it to the hospital 2 hours after he was pronounced dead. It's one of those situations. Austin was my youngest child. I have 4 children, and he was my youngest. And, you know, from the time they're little, you instill in them things. Go to school, get an education. I want you to go to college, all these types of things. He was in his first year of college. He was working a job. He was making me proud. He was making us proud. He was contributing to the greater community, which is what I had intended for him to do. And to have his life taken in that fashion, I felt it was, you know, really unfair. And, you know, and so I'm looking at this thing, and this license plate, it tells my story. I want the whole world to know that we exist and that we have been impacted by these unfortunate incidents that continue to occur. That was my son. This is what I have of him now. All I have are his ashes. Because people, not just people who drink and drive, but people who text and drive, people who read the newspaper and drive and put on their makeup and drive and all these other things that some feel they are entitled to do while operating a moving vehicle. And this is senseless. It is absolutely senseless. That broken heart should be on every license plate, because even if you haven't lost anyone, you should still have a broken heart that this is happening every single day in our community. Every single day, someone is abusing the community. Something needs to change. I think this is a start, but there has to be a greater awareness that this is not acceptable. It is not acceptable for people to intently get behind a moving vehicle and do things other than being focused on where they're going and how to get there safely. How many more people, 82 people died last year needlessly. Needlessly. How many more people do we have to lose before we say enough is enough? Or do we sit idly by and just allow people to continue to abuse the community? I miss my son every single day. I was just sharing with these guys, as I'm leaving my house to come here, I go to my mailbox. There's a piece of mail that came for him today. And I used to just say, Austin, come and get your mail. Something has to change. Thank you.
We have one more story to tell today. And I'd like to ask Gina Calistro to come up and share some thoughts and stories about her father she lost.
Good morning. I am honored to be here today to tell my story. April 12th, 2009, Easter Sunday, the day that forever changed my life, the day my parents were struck by a drunk driver. A day that started out like any other Easter I'd ever known. Food was being prepared, family gathered all together, children giggling as they hunted for Easter eggs. When the day came to an end, my mother hugged me and said, as her and my father got in their vehicle, "Gina, this was the best Easter ever." Little did I know, 5 minutes later, as they turned out of my development in Blaine onto Lexington Avenue, our lives would be changed forever. My parents were struck head-on by a drunk driver, traveling at 60 miles per hour, southbound in a northbound lane. My sister and her young children came upon the accident as they were following not far behind. My parents were both critically injured. My father, while trapped in the vehicle himself, held my mother's airway open until help arrived. My mother had to be extricated from the vehicle and was airlifted to the hospital with little hope of survival. My father was transported by ambulance. They were never able to see each other conscious again. 63 days later, my father succumbed to his injuries. My mother survived. However, she faced years of therapy around her injuries, but more painful was the heartbreak of losing my father. My father was a Vietnam veteran and served on the Minneapolis Police Department for 30 years. He had been retired less than 1 year with many plans ahead of him. This senseless, preventable, and violent crime left my mother a widow after 40 years of marriage to her high school sweetheart, left 3 grandchildren without a grandfather, and my sister and I without a father who we absolutely adored. The drunk driver who hit my parents was a repeat DUI offender. He was unharmed physically, but must now live forever with the fact that his bad decision to drink and drive took the life of a one-of-a-kind, larger-than-life man who meant the world to many. My entire family have on their vehicles the Remembering Victims of Impaired driver's license plate, which we hope will serve as a reminder to others to plan ahead and not drink and drive. Minnesota law enforcement officers, many of whom I consider to be my family, continue to step up to the challenging task of mitigating drunk driving through enforcement efforts to prevent tragedies much like those of you have heard today. To them I say, keep up the great work, stay safe out there. Each and every one of you are a hero in my eyes, just like my father, Officer Michael Calistro. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. The Department of Public Safety and the Office of Traffic Safety Impaired Enforcement effort is a statewide, multi-agency campaign. The other officers here with me represent just a few of the nearly 400 agencies involved in the campaign. Last year in Minnesota, law enforcement arrested 25,719 motorists for DWI. That's an average of 70 each and every day. These are very scary numbers, and as long as there are fatalities from drunk driving, we will continue to remove drivers who threaten to take your life, my life, and their own because of a very poor decision. Please help us keep our roads safe by not drinking and driving. Now I'd like to turn the podium back over to Donna, and we'll open up for questions.
Yes, we're opening up for questions from the media if you have anything.
Do you know the number of extra patrols that will be on the streets for these next 2 weeks?
Well, we don't have a specific number of extra patrols, but this is a national effort, so we have both grant funded and people doing it on their own agency time. So we will be granting out money through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to the locals. So we'll be covering it statewide. It'll be all the state patrol districts. It will be 62 county sheriff offices and 220 municipal, tribal, and university police departments. So we don't know exactly how many officers, but believe me, they're going to be out there patrolling.
Donna, hi, I'm Nina. Can you explain why right now, I know we're leading into Labor Day, but we often see increased patrols around different holidays. Can you talk about why it's very important this time in the summertime?
Well, summertime is our deadliest month. We call it our 100 deadliest days. More people are out on the road, they're traveling, they're vacationing. The roads are dry, and frankly, they're traveling at higher speeds. So in the wintertime in Minnesota, we'll have more crashes, but there'll be more impactful, deadly crashes in the summertime. So it's very important as people are out celebrating with their families, enjoying their family vacations, coming to the end of summer before school starts, to put safety first, to drive at safe speeds, never drink and drive, designate a driver, always buckle that seatbelt no matter what seating position you're in, and put those distractions away because it's simply not worth it.
So today being called the Impaired Driving Victims Day, can you explain the difference between impaired driving and drunk driving and how both are dangerous in their own respect?
Well, alcohol-related driving is, when we're tracking those in crash facts, it's anyone who has a traceable amount of alcohol in their system. But drunk driving or impaired driving, that's when they're at 0.08 limit or above. So that's the difference. So you see some different numbers in crash facts, and hopefully that clarifies it a little bit.
So impaired driving, though, is considered drunk driving?
That's correct.
I think sometimes people's, obviously, those stories are so powerful to hear, and thank you for sharing them. Sometimes I think people can be a bit self-serving and they're more afraid of what's the consequence. Can you talk about what a first-time offender might face for drunk driving, and then is there maybe someone else can talk about, and then if there's what needs to happen to maybe make some harsher penalties for repeat offenders?
Well, I don't know, Eric, do you want to take it from the law enforcement perspective? I can tell you that, you know, that they have an administrative, we have two tracks. We have a criminal track, which they're criminally charged for, and then there's also the administrative track that takes away their driver's license. So immediately their driver's license is going to be revoked. They're going to get a notice of revocation, and so driver and vehicle services will take action against their driver's license. Then they have a separate track that goes through the criminal court system, and depending on the outcome of that and the level of impairment, and there's all kinds of factors, there isn't exactly what their fine is going to be or how long they, if any, they'll be spending time in jail. I can tell you if they're at 0.16 alcohol concentration or above, or if it's their second violation, they're going to be required to get ignition interlock installed on their car to get back to legal driving. Ignition interlock is an important tool that we have now in our toolkit because it can monitor the alcohol use, and the car simply won't start and they can't get on the road, and these tragedies can occur if they have the ignition interlock in their vehicle.
Do you feel, or maybe Lieutenant Roski, that we need harsher penalties for repeat offenders?
I guess, I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but you know, the reality is when these crashes happen, when we respond to these incidents or we arrest someone for drunk driving, nobody goes out and says, I'm going to get in a crash and kill someone, or I'm going to get behind the wheel and get arrested. So, you know, what we're trying to do is get ahead of that by making people aware of the penalties and the consequences, aware of the impact on families, so they make a smart decision beforehand. This isn't about catching people. This is about stopping and preventing these things from happening. So, you know, whenever we encounter a situation involving an impaired driver, whether it's a crash or an arrest scenario, you know, it's the same situation. That person, you know, 20 minutes prior or whenever had a decision to make and chose the wrong path. And our goal is to make them aware of the options, whether it's designated driving, public transportation, call a taxi, call a friend, do anything. But don't put yourself in a situation where you're going to create another situation where a family has to suffer like this. Or, you know, obviously the personal consequences of an arrest are significant, but they're nothing compared to what these folks have gone through.